Well, when I was younger, very young, about 9, I started playing drums. So I had a feel for music on a very basic level as I was learning to play a musical instrument. But my main interest when I was that age was playing pool. And the movie The Hustler was my favorite movie then, and it still to this day remains my favorite movie. And I learned how to play pool with my next door neighbor who was a jazz freak. And every day when I'd go over and play with him, the jazz radio station in Los Angeles was on. And that's how I really became exposed to jazz. And I had my dad drive me to Shelley's Manhole one night and heard Bobby Hutcherson in 1970. That was the first artist that I heard live. And then I went out and got some forged identification so I could go to Concerts by the Sea, which was 21 and over. I was using an international driver's license, which at the time you could get pretty easily, and you could manipulate the characters. This is pre-internet, pre-everything. And it worked like a charm. I mean, I saw McCoy-Tyner Quartet before I was legal, and it felt real good. Saw Elvin Jones the night he got a little too involved with drinking, and he walked off the stage because he couldn't play a set, and he was just basically telling jokes the whole night. And he was complaining about how much it cost him to hire a cab to drive him from Hollywood to Redondo Beach. And he just couldn't get over it, and he kept repeating the story over and over again. And then after about the 4th time he told the story, he just got up and walked off and never played, and Howard Rumsey had to give everybody their money back. So besides seeing McCoy-Tyner at Concerts by the Sea, Howard, and seeing Elvin Jones there, and of course going to the Lighthouse many times at around the same period. But the Lighthouse, they serve food, so you didn't have to be 21 or over. And they had a miners' night, $2 to get in on Tuesday night or Thursday. So I saw Roland Kirk, Cannonball, Freddie Hubbard, and I was 17, 18. I had a driver's license, so I could drive down there, and I was down there almost every week. Music Incorporated, on and on and on. All the great jazz artists were touring the West Coast. They would either play the Lighthouse, well at that time there was Shelley's. There was a number of clubs in Los Angeles where you could go hear jazz. The Godfather Lounge. The Parisian Room was my favorite club in LA. That's where Hank Crawford, Art Blakey, a lot of the black artists who played soul music or incorporated soul in their music. The CTI sound, that was the club of choice for Esther Phillips and people like that.
Freddie too, probably, right?
Freddie Hubbard played just about everywhere in Los Angeles. He moved around quite a bit. But I saw Freddie at the Lighthouse with the band with Lenny White and George Cables, right around the time he was on CTI after the Red Clay album came out. But Freddie was an icon in LA. Well, he lived in Los Angeles, so for him, he was always playing somewhere when he wasn't out on the road. Well, I think I just started getting paid about a year ago. Well, I did a number of internships, and actually my first job in the business was working for George Wein in festival productions in 1982 on a festival called the Newport Jazz Festival in Los Angeles, helping out on ground transportation, picking up artists at the airport. And that was quite an experience, and having to take Oliver Lake to some party in Watts, and there was no Garmin back then, GPS, and scribbled out an address on a piece of paper, and we finally found it and got lost a few times. And it's not the best thing to get lost in Watts when you're driving an artist around, but we made it through it. And that was a great experience. But the first experience that inspired me to get into this business was actually booking Larry Fine of the Three Stooges into my high school to do a talk and show some reels. And we charged 50 cents to get into the gymnasium, and we sold it out. And after that experience in 11th grade, I decided, in my love for jazz, that I wanted to go into the jazz business, you know, be around artists and entertainers. It was very inspiring. So my first paid gig would have been with Playboy Enterprises in 1983, after the experience of volunteering for festival productions with Darlene Chan in Los Angeles. She was good enough to recommend me for the job as publicity manager for the Playboy Jazz Festival. At that time I was freelance writing for Music Connection magazine, which I was getting paid for. Not much, but you know, that's the way it was, and the way, unfortunately, it still is, unfortunately, for jazz journalism in a lot of contexts. But the Music Connection magazine experience was a wonderful time because I had an editor who was very open-minded to covering a lot of different music, and they didn't have any jazz journalism in that magazine. So he gave me pretty much carte blanche, and I was pretty much doing overnight reviews for artists that were coming through Los Angeles. I was also working for NPR, but that was pro bono, volunteering, doing air shifts in broadcasting. But I would say that thinking back, 1983, 31 years ago, working for the Playboy Jazz Festival was my first official paid job in the jazz business. And then after that, I moved to New York in 1984 when I accepted a position to work for Peter Levinson, who was visiting Los Angeles in 1983 at that festival because the Modern Jazz Quartet, who he represented, were playing on that festival. So we created a relationship from that experience because I was handling them during their stay in LA at the festival. And I told him if he ever had an opportunity in New York, please consider me for a position. And lo and behold, a year later, he called me up and said, one of my colleagues, Helene Grease, is leaving. She's going to work at Radio City. And would you like to move to New York, but you got to be here in 2 weeks. So when I arrived there, I think within a week, the first person I met in the business in New York was a man by the name of Ira Sabin, who published a magazine called Jazz Times. And
it was Radio Free Jazz.
In '84, was it still Radio Free Jazz?
Jazz Times, maybe, yeah.
I believe it. I remember that Jazz Times magazine was a tabloid as Radio Free Jazz, but I think at this time it was Jazz Times in '84, and Ira was visiting New York to talk to Peter about handling the Jazz Times conference at the Roosevelt Hotel. And Ira was very charismatic, very colorful, and very honest with his assessment of how things should be when you come to New York and you're being hosted. And he wanted to know where some of the tastes are, and can I speak candidly?
Speak candidly, and we can just edit it out.
Okay.
It's not okay.
Peter, where's the scotch? Where's the pot? Come on.
Where's the scotch? That will be the segment title. Where's the scotch?
I came all the way from D.C. Come on. Anyway, I said, wow, this is the jazz business. What an introduction. I can't wait to get started. So anyway, those are some of my formative experiences, and that led on to my work at MCA Records, from working with Peter, and I've stayed in the business since that experience, and I've just been trying to grow ever since. Well, I think from my perspective, I'd like to answer that two ways. Pre-90s, in terms of the impact of young artists on the scene. I mean, we talk about what happened 30 years ago, the Wynton Marsalis and the Young Lions. That created a lot of opportunities for young artists to get record deals. It formalized the business in terms of a structure of management, agents, artists getting booked, getting routed into certain markets and getting exposure. And that cycle of activity sustained itself for probably a good 15 to 20 years. Theme recordings were being made by major labels. Joe Henderson won a Grammy Award. I mean, these were really profound experiences that were taking place. And of course, things don't last forever, and the market has gone through a lot of upheaval. And I think with a lot of the dynamic changed, it forced a lot of artists to be more resourceful, more creative, very DIY, guerrilla marketing. And I think that that transformation of moving from a record label of traditional support in terms of that mechanism, where artists looked for other ways in terms of how to market themselves, how to record their music, document it, retain ownership rights. All of these changes that have occurred pretty much at the time that the internet was becoming more and more part of our everyday life. I mean, so the artists were very quick to absorb and to move in that direction and take advantage of what the internet had to offer in terms of streaming music, selling their music, uploading video for promotion, and all the things that social media has been able to offer. Hey, I'm Don Lucoff. For this videos and for other videos, you gotta check out jazztimes.com.